happening in our culture. It's been happening. As far as mental health is concerned, we just haven't been addressing it. So we've had mental health issues historically for a long time. People have just suffered. Mental health, it's interesting what happens in this country. We usually go in circles, and when something hits the public stage, it usually hits the public stage in the midst of chaos, a lot of adversity, a lot of controversy. But that's not always a bad thing, because what it does, it says that at least this issue now has a public awareness. And once it gets a public awareness, it usually doesn't go back into hiding. And if it doesn't go back into hiding, in some way, we have to begin to address it. And that's usually a beginning of addressing an issue, is when it gets to a public stage. So for example, when LGBTQ was closeted, it was condemned. Eventually, once it becomes something that's on the public stage, yes, it's still condemned and there's still controversy, but it's making progress for something for the positive, for the better for that group of individuals. So if it stayed within the closet, if you will, that proverbial closet, it would never get that chance to be on that public stage and get an acceptance, get an identity. So what happens in a culture? Everybody has a social identity. It's an identity that's different from how we define ourselves. So for example, I lived in Egypt for 2 years. And prior to my going there, I said this to myself when I prepared, that I'm going to this African country, and my blackness, we were on in many shades, and I would just blend in. That's what I told myself, and it sounded smart.
Right.
I knew I had the truth. Well, when I got there, I realized that I was the anomaly, because I was told, and this is in the mid-90s, I was told once I stepped foot in the place called Fayoum, and on that campus, that black people didn't live in America. And that's what I was claiming, to be an American. So for the years that I was there, from the day I stepped on the university campus in the city of Fayoum to the day I left, I was always asked about my nationality. Well, now here's the case. I identified as an American, but I had an identity in Egypt that said no. So I had to deal with that social imposition, how they imposed upon what an American could look like. I had to deal with that. I had to address that question. I couldn't get past doing some things without dealing with that particular question. So our social identities, those identities that a culture says that I'm gonna impose this on you, and nobody necessarily has to ask you about yourself, they can impose this meaning upon you as well. Those are the identities that most of us deal with. So we usually don't see people, we see what they mean to us. And we do the same thing with mental health.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And usually with mental health, it's something negative. So a lot of communities don't deal with it. It's quieted because it has that negative connotation to it. And traditionally, I'm not gonna say this totally for every black community, but traditionally, the ways that they've dealt with mental health is to pray about it, is to talk to their pastor about it, who usually does not have the experience or the training to deal with mental health issues. So here comes that social identity once again, that this person that you have imposed meaning upon, that he's supposed to have the mind of God and hence be give you your answers, is not really the person that can help you. So we really have to sometimes change what we think, change and realize that we have these various identities. I mean something to me that's very different than somebody who sees me and does not know me, but he lives in a society that says everything about you has been defined, and that's everybody. Your race, I don't like that term, but I'll put it for the color of your skin, your age, your height, the way you wear your hair, the makeup that you might wear, all of that is defined. And if it's defined in your public, then they don't have to ask you anything. They just impose whatever that definition allows them to impose. That's the danger.
That's so interesting. And at Waltz, we try to put out the figures that we know, and 25% of people, all people, live with a mental health condition.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's 1 out of 4. And the severity ranges. There's a lot of anxiety and depression that we focus on because it's most common, but it's also very hidden, just as you say. And we're hopeful that right now, as you had said, is a great time to keep these conversations going, because I'm so afraid, even though the spotlight is on it, that window or that door will close, or those curtains will close on this issue, and we'll get back to normal. And we don't want that, right? I mean, we know that every 40 seconds a human being on this earth dies by suicide. But we often don't talk even about the idea that there is so much suffering, right? People suffer every day with these conditions, and they suffer oftentimes in silence because just exactly what you're talking about, the judgment and the definition and things, and in particular men. Men are less apt to speak about it, and they are also die at much higher rates by suicide. Yeah, so.
Let me
Yeah.
sorry.
No, continue, please.
Let me jump in here with issues with men, because once again, here's this social identity that they're supposed to be strong. This tradition of what a man is supposed to be, he's supposed to be a protector. So if he's supposed to protect, he can't show that weakness. I opine that men suffer very much from the lack of friendship that this linear thinking society that we have says that they cannot have, because we have an either-or reality. And we teach our students in their composition courses, English 101, that the either-or is a logical fallacy. Yet, in a linear thinking society, either-or is exactly how they think. So men lack relationships with other men. Now, we'll talk about the son needing the father, but we won't talk about that man needing that other man to be his friend. If we look at something like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and not look at it in the same context that we like to sexualize relationships, it's companionship. Because when you look at an epic, the hero and his friend are usually identified as companion. That companion was more so important to him than his marriage to his wife. So his wife was his wife, but his comrade was his companion, because his comrade would have to have his back in battle. Now, in this culture, we don't realize the importance of that male camaraderie.
Yes.
It in my thinking, can assist in stopping a lot of the violence that we might see that occurs among men, because we don't validate their having an intimate, when I say physical, I mean be able to touch, give a hug. We don't allow that to happen without sexualizing it. So here's a case in point. I'm leaving the United States, 8 hours in Egypt, at the Heathrow Airport, and so eventually I land in Egypt. It's 12 midnight, I'm in Cairo, the smell of falafel is just wafting through the air, and there is Mustafa, my landlord, waiting for me to get through customs. He's tall. At the time, I had lost a whole lot of weight. Can you believe it?
Yeah, I can believe it.
He's looking at it. So I was about 115 pounds. And Mustafa looks at me, he smiles, he grabs and holds me by my hand, and there we go walking hand in hand, swinging to his car. And I thought, what if that were Greenville Spartanburg Airport?
Right.
Now,
Exactly.
his was a gesture of friendship.
Absolutely.
He had embraced me. He had embraced me with what he would do in his own culture. He embraced me. That was beautiful. What if I had taken my hand away and posed this meaning that this culture allows me to impose upon that gesture?
Right.
I would have torn that friendship apart.
Absolutely.
And that's what we don't do. We don't allow men to really have friends. Buddies, maybe. A companion, no. And that's a mental issue for men, I would say.
you.